Welcome to Real Rockford Files, for tales of the paranormal, supernatural, and the flat-out unbelievable. Today I'm going to be sharing ghost stories from Delaware. Let's get into it. Story 1. I hope y'all can bear with me, as he just passed 3 months ago. My grandfather has been sick for the past 3 years, and in January 2007 he took a turn for the worse. Toward the middle of March, I had taken time from work to be with my grandfather. Every night I went to my fiance's house to stay. March 19th started out the usual day. My fiance and I went to my grandmother's house to spend some time with my grandfather. We were there until about 11:30 that night. We went back to her house where I was ready for bed. Just as I laid down, about 12:30, I received a phone call from my mom on my cell phone. She had told me that my grandfather had passed away at 12:17 a.m. on March 20th. I started to cry. I called to my fiance, who had just taken a shower, and as I sat on the couch, she came out and I just looked at her. Then she said, "He passed, didn't he?" All I did was shake my head yes. She told her mom that we were going back. Even as I sit here typing this, I'm starting to cry. We got there and everyone was around him. I had decided to lay on the floor. Everyone else was sitting down or out in the kitchen talking. Next thing I knew, I felt something kick me in the leg. I looked and asked everyone if they had kicked me. Of course they all said no. I think my grandfather wanted to tell me goodbye. Story 2. For some background knowledge, my father built our house a year or two before my experience. I was either 7 or 8, don't remember exactly. At my age, I hadn't had any family die to even begin to comprehend or think about the afterlife. Looking back, I think it's interesting that the house was new and still having spirits entering or leaving, doing whatever it was doing. As a child, I had a bunk bed that my great-grandfather had built for me. One night I suddenly woke facing the wall. Not sure what had woken me up, and I just laid there for a few seconds and then felt a heavy presence in the room. I actually thought my mom or dad might have been in the room checking on me. I said out loud, "Hey," as I rolled over to look over my bed. A man was standing there by my bed at about eye level since it was a bunk bed. He was just staring intently. For a split second, I thought it was my dad. I realized in that split second it wasn't my father, and his look changed from intently to an almost evil, sadistic grin. It looked as though his fists were clenched at his sides, like there was something in his hands, but I couldn't make it out. He looked real, but at the same time not, and had a greenish, dull, hazy tint. I didn't notice what he was wearing, as he was just so dull-colored. This thought process of analyzing this man happened in maybe a second or two. I yanked my covers over my head and laid there in paralyzed fear, unable to scream or move. I ever so slightly and slowly turned over towards the wall again, and just laid there, my heart pounding so loudly that was all I could hear. I knew I had been completely awake, as I was now thinking about what happened, and I couldn't comprehend it. I wanted to scream for my mom, but I couldn't. Something in me said, "Don't make him mad by getting your mom." I wanted to pretend it was a dream, and that way it wasn't real and he couldn't hurt me. Either way, I didn't tell my parents about it until years later when I was a teenager and we were talking about ghosts one morning at breakfast. Throughout my years living in my parents' house, I had a few other random experiences at night, like waking up in paralyzed fear, feeling a presence in the room, and sleeping with the light on all the time. I would have fits of nightmares where I felt like I was almost not in control of myself, and I couldn't wake up, even though I was aware of it being a dream and I was trying to wake up. I had many feelings over the years where I felt someone was watching me, especially in the shower, and the hairs on the back of my neck would stand up. Either way, I see all these smaller experiences as they could be whatever, but I'm sure of my experience as a child. I certainly don't wish for it to happen again, and it truly was one of the most frightening moments of my life. Still makes my heart and mind race thinking about it today. Before I move on to the next story, I would like to point out that a majority of my viewers aren't subscribed. If you can just take a moment and hit that subscribe button, maybe click like or leave a comment, it'll go a long way in helping me fight the algorithm. You can always take it back later, and it's totally free. Now, back to the stories. Story 3. This is one of my many ghost experiences, but definitely the most cherished. In 2003, when I just turned 13, my mother and I moved to Middletown, Delaware. My mom rented out an old house that was built in the 1700s, so the possibility of it being haunted was expected. The day we first arrived, I told my mom, let me scope the house out, which meant let me walk through it alone and see what kind of vibe I get. I did this with every house we moved into. As soon as I stepped in the house, I felt a calming and peaceful aura immediately. Once I started walking around a bit, I felt someone walking with me, and in ways I cannot explain, we engaged in a conversation without me actually talking out loud, which was something I never experienced, and even though very odd to me, it did not scare me. The spirit that was talking to me was that of a little girl named Sarah. She told me many things about her house and her life. I felt so privileged to be welcomed into the house by the true owner. The little girl told me that she was 8 years old and she died of the flu, along with her father. I can't recall Sarah's father's name, but I do remember his actions, which were in a way amusing. The little girl told me that her father enjoyed to drink, and coincidentally, the bottles of vodka and such my mom had sitting on the mantel would oddly fill up or would become almost empty even when no one was there to drink them. Another thing that Sarah pointed out to me before anything happened was that her father did not like loud music, and again, coincidentally, every time my mom would have the music on, it would always magically get turned down to almost a whisper. The house itself was amazing. It was a fixer-upper, not cosmetically pretty, but it had beauty beyond looks. It had history. Sarah showed me a little wooden panel that opened in the staircase that led to an underground railroad passage in the basement. The most common thing that people noticed was footsteps being heard in the dining room. It wasn't exactly footsteps, it was Sarah dancing. It didn't take long to get used to that. After talking with Sarah, we realized we were meant to meet, and we moving to the house felt like fate. The funny thing is that right after having my first conversation with Sarah, I told my mom everything she told me, which later was proof for all the strange happenings in the house. But the thing that really surprised me was when the neighbor that had lived in the house next door his entire life attempted to tell me the story I just told my mom about the girl and her father, but I finished his story before he started. My mother and I have since moved back to New Jersey, but I will never forget Sarah, her father, and the house at 55 East Main Street. Story 4. My name is Debbie, and I live with my boyfriend Bill. We have been together for a little over a year now. Since April this year, I started doing EVP recordings with my boyfriend, which he supports and finds interesting. Plus, we take photos with many orbs. Here's my story. We were fishing after 12 midnight on our anniversary after a late night dinner. We went to Augustine Beach in Delaware. We were not getting any bites, so I stopped fishing. However, Bill continued. I then thought I would do a little EVP recording and asked to take some photos. After I took my last shot, I was checking my pictures out standing in front of the pathway, which is the only way to enter unless you walked a long way, and walked right in front of me. So as I was looking at the pictures on the camera, I noticed something to my right side across from me. Take note now, Bill was sitting in a chair 3 feet from me on my right side. Behind me, still fishing, which I was not really aware of because I saw a guy whom I thought was Bill with something glowing in his hand. Thinking it was Bill, I thought he must have caught a fish and had it hanging on the rod still, as from the moonlight was glowing because of the silver color the most fish get at night. The whole time thinking, what is Bill doing? Why was he over there now, about 8 or 9 feet away without saying a word to me? I felt like I was in another world. It felt so strange. Not once did I look over where Bill was sitting in the chair at this time. I was just standing there like in space, so to speak. And then I saw a glowing light coming from the side of him. And then there walks out in front of him another guy, which then turned and looked at me and started to walk away in front of the first guy. Then the other guy followed. I then thought, oh my God, and turned around to look at Bill sitting there looking straight ahead. I quietly said, Bill. He turned and looked at me. I said, look, and pointed at them. And he looked back at them once, then turned all the way around to look at them again, and said it's time to go now. He took me to the truck, said here's my cell phone, keys, and locked the doors. As I waited, he went back to get the chairs, etc., plus looked around with the flashlight to find them gone. He said there was no way out other than the path which the truck was sitting dead in front of, with my eyes peeled to the path watching for Bill. He said the only other way out was the river. He said when I looked at him and told him to look at them, that there was no color at all in my face, and I seemed like I was in a trance. He also asked me why I never once looked over at him or told him at first, and I said because I was sure it was you, and then you was some strange man, and thinking what the heck is Bill doing? In fact, I felt so sure I never once while watching this turned to see if you were fishing. Well, not until the end. The crazy thing is, I never once thought about anything in a ghostly way, and I just got done asking if any entities would like to communicate and if I can get some pictures. Well, I never did get that picture, as I didn't really move much. Story 5. I used to experience pressure during sleep when I was 15 or 16 years old when I was in India. I also experienced as if someone was touching and pressing my skin with a finger sometimes, and I used to think my brother was doing it to wake me up. I used to get up and never found anything around me. I told my parents and they advised me to chant God's name in mind whenever such a thing should happen. I avoided sleeping alone in my room during those days, but surprisingly, no one except for me complained about it in that house. After some span of time, I stopped experiencing those things. Now I live in the USA. A few nights ago, I experienced a very strange thing again, and I cannot believe it. When I was sleeping during the night, I felt that I was dreaming something. Someone was touching my upper body with a palm. It felt so real. I looked around, and a little boy with a white sheet around his shoulders was walking away from me. When I looked at him, he gave me a look back and his face seemed painted in white too. Then I suddenly felt scared, and I could still feel that someone did really touch my upper body. I opened my eyes, nothing was around me, but even with my eyes open, I was feeling someone left me with a warm touch on my upper body. I could feel it in all my senses. Next night, almost 1 hour later when I fall asleep, I suddenly felt as if my bed started to shake. I got a strange feeling as if there was an earthquake, and I opened my eyes. I found that my bed was still shaking, and it stopped after about a minute. I just started praying and somehow managed to sleep again. Next morning, I did not hear any news about an earthquake in my area. Now, I read a lot of stories on the internet, and as advised by someone, I have started chanting Mary and Jesus whenever I go home and go to sleep. Fortunately, I have not experienced anything after these 2 nights, and I really wish not to. Story 6. My story takes place at my grandma and grandpa's house. As for a little backstory to the house, it was built in 1943 in an old neighborhood. The house was 1 floor and had 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, a kitchen, a living room, a porch, and a gigantic backyard. The 3 rooms were located down a long, narrow hallway, which always creeped me out. My grandparents' room was at the very end, and my room, which later became the laundry/guest room, was right across from it. Then was Nikki's room, my older cousin, who was 11 years older than me, which was across from the bathroom. At the start of the hall was the living room, and in front was the kitchen. At the time I was about 4 years of age, I'm 14 now, so I was afraid of the dark. In the middle of the night I had to use the restroom. So I grabbed my Disney princess flashlight out of my toy bin and headed down the hall. I got shivers from the AC my grandma had turned on. I finished my business and proceeded to turn off the bathroom light and click my flashlight on. I was right at the door frame when something caught my eye. It was blacker than the pitch black of the house already, and it stood out. Not possibly the mistake of something shining off the light, of anything, or a trick of positions. I saw the shadow of a person at the end of the hall, the exact end that my room was at. I was frozen with fear for what was most likely a few seconds, but felt like an eternity. It started to fade, and I made a run for my room. As I passed the spot in which the thing was a few seconds before, I felt something grab my arm. I tripped over a toy as I panicked and jumped into bed, throwing the covers over my head. That's the last time I get up in the middle of the night. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed.